So, hope you're all doing well. Good day yesterday. With me here in the panel are, I'll just use their first names because this was a last-minute change in the schedule. So, Danielle from Compass, yeah.
Yeah, would you like me to introduce myself?
Yeah, sure. And David and Lowan, and the topic is the challenges and opportunities in psychedelics in relation to the medical model. We'll come to that later, but maybe we'll just take a short introduction of yourselves and where you come from and your interests in this field.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just want to say thank you to the organizers. This has been an incredible meeting so far, and I'm just really excited about the potential for psychedelic medicine in Iceland. So, as was mentioned, I'm no longer at Compass as of just a few days ago, but while I was at Compass, I was heading up our clinical care innovation function, and we were responsible for designing and developing the clinical care model that was paired with our psilocybin. I also was responsible for working on our training program and our therapy optimization research. My background is as a psychologist. I was in academia and then tech, and most recently in psychedelic medicine. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I've learned a tremendous amount over the years in trying to implement new innovations into the mental health care space. And actually, I was just reflecting last night at dinner that a lot of what I'm observing in the psychedelic medicine space reminds me of the tech wave and the tech hype, where there was enormous excitement about the potential for technology to address our most intractable problems in mental health care. And so while I certainly am optimistic about the potential for psychedelic medicine, I think there's a lot we can learn from the history in this field, especially from these other domains. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of already just spoke, so I don't want to spend time into the psychiatrist work in field. Most of you just heard, so I'll leave it to Lowan.
Emergency medicine by background, the regional director of the Nordics for Awakn Life Sciences. I've been working primarily with ketamine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for the last 7 years in the US and Norway. And I'm the medical advisor to the public ketamine unit in Norway, and site physician for some MDMA, psilocybin, and ketamine trials in the public system in Oslo.
Thank you all. Maybe I just want to start you off on a macro level, because we can all agree more or less that this is the third attempt of these chemicals to enter Western medicine. The second one being stopped by Nixon, etc., like David showed here with the amount of studies. So in order to get mental health professionals and also the governing systems of the Western world to try to kind of come up to speed with all those enthusiasts who are way ahead in a way, and we need to kind of regulate this better, more research, etc., because in my view, this is also a great push, could be a great push forward for mental health. Having sat on mental health conferences for years, this is the same discussion, and this could be exactly what psychiatry so badly needs to evolve forward, and also for users and carers around the world, which are tens and hundreds of millions of people. So therefore, I ask you humbly to try to address this macro issue of how you foresee this transformation state that we are in right now. We can all agree on that. We are in a transformative state. How do you see it mature, develop? Because already we have $7 billion at least in research, 3, 4, 5 companies on NASDAQ. You know, the bubble is there, but you know, some speakers touched on this yesterday. What's your vision? Who wants to start?
Maybe I can just start. We were interested in talking about this topic. We've heard a range of methods where psychedelic medicine can be implemented. And what we wanted to talk about was the medical model, which is really about a secular context, where the provision of care is by a licensed mental health professional. We're talking about, to what extent might this new model of care be implemented within the existing systems of care. And that means you go to your clinic, your local clinic, you go to your therapist, and you receive preparation. The administration session occurs, and then you have some integration. And when thinking about how to fit this and what the response may be, you have to think about, well, what does the current system look like? And what have been some of the challenges thus far? And I think there's been a major problem with legitimacy of the field of mental health and acceptance of it, because a lot of our current treatments are palliative in nature. They don't really get to the root of the problem. Ben talked about, we don't talk about cures. There's been talk about, well, we have to do more science, understand the mechanisms so that we can actually get to the root of these problems and actually cure people. We don't talk about that enough in psychiatry. But what's unique and what David was just talking about in some of his data is that there's tremendous opportunity in psychedelic medicine where we see a different route of action. We see different mechanisms of change where people are actually resolving longstanding conflicts about their mental health condition, and it seems unique and interesting. So first we have to talk about that. We have to share the data and prepare people for this kind of experience. It's really different than any one they've had. And I think also we need to educate people about what does preparation look like. We talk about it as if we all know, but I have to ask many of you, well, what happens in these prep sessions? What happens in the administration session? What happens in integration? A lot of patients don't know what that entails. And so I think there's quite a bit of work that needs to happen there. There's regulators who are terrified of these potential medicines that have been drugs, quote unquote drugs that have been classified as illegal. There's so many paradigm shifts that need to occur, yet I'm excited about the potential of it because, with this new paradigm of care, we have now also a new emphasis on set and setting, which hasn't been in place in the mental health field. Some of the treatment centers where people receive their care almost look like a prison. People, have a long history of, involuntary treatment. And right now we're talking about also a clinical care model where people are empowered and we're telling them the wisdom is inside of them. It's not the mental health provider who is the expert, it's you. I mean, there's so many dramatic shifts that we're talking about.
Exactly.
So
that's three-tier system is changing. There are so many changes there, and these are happening fast, and it's about that adaptation. How fast and is the system willing to adapt? These sort of questions come to mind when you speak about this. And it's also the matter of the governance, public funding, public provision, or is it private provision, private funding? All sorts of these structural ideas come to mind. But first of all, like you point out, the willingness of the system also to adapt this new way of, in every way, in a paradigm shift in giving care.
We often found, just one last comment, when we were training our clinicians to deliver care for psilocybin therapy, a lot of what we felt like we were doing was asking clinicians to unlearn what they'd learned. Don't be so active, sit back.
And how do you foresee the role of the universities teaching medical models,
They need more Davids of the world. They need more incredible science to convince them that this is a legitimate field, and that it's not just hyperbole. There's real data supporting some of this work. Even though some of these medicines, have been used for thousands of years, they need to have a Western lens of randomized controlled trials and neuroimaging and a number of this work to legitimize.
Either of you?
Yeah, just a comment before we go too much into the obstacles and challenges. I think one of the really exciting things about this field is that it looks so promising based on the data that we have. The effects are so large and so rapid and so durable that if all the phase 3 trials pan out the way that we hope and expect some of them to pan out, there will be incredible drivers, both in the private and the public stakeholder systems, that will allow us to overcome those obstacles. Because if you have such great burden of disease, we have so much of an economic burden, non-economic costs, and this huge gap in what we need to do and what we're actually doing. And so as long as the science supports these treatments, I think both the private industry and the stakeholders in the public health system, insurance companies, we will figure out these obstacles. We will figure out different ways to do it. And yeah.
So the pressure is on you, David. Academics of this world, how do you respond to this? How fast can you go?
Yeah, I don't know. I think if anything, I want to slow down.
Yeah.
I think, I think also one of the things that you asked, Ella, pitched was, it has been tried before, and it kind of started and then was slaughtered and stopped and came to quite a brutal end and a big pause. What's different now? I think a lot of things actually are different. One of the things, and that's just obviously with my completely biased hat on, neuroscience, oh, so cool, we can do all these things. First of all, these tools that we are using, and other people even better than I am, these imaging techniques are, it's not that we can understand everything in the brain. It's scratching the top of an iceberg, but they did not exist, a lot of these tools, in the 50s, 60s. How important is that for the development? It's a good question. Actually, the companies, do they need this information? Do they need to know that much about the mechanisms? It's good for sophisticating it, getting more precise, understanding the conditions better, understanding the brain better. We can also use them to understand consciousness, which I didn't speak about, was something our lab is also doing and other labs are doing. Fantastic, using neuroscience to do all that. Does it support the development? To some degree, I think it does. It sounds very convincing when you have, it does this and that in the brain. It does sound convincing. Strictly speaking, the companies don't often really need that. They just need the efficacy and safety data, basically, on a sufficient scale. First some animal work, and then humans in these different phases. The imaging is sort of sugar on top, but I do think it does help. And it's also very stimulating to work in, although sometimes I feel, I had a holotropic breathwork experience. We do that to prepare our teams. And I had a very profound experience with the team. It was quite embarrassing. I was crying in front of the whole team. And then I came out thinking, I don't care how it works in the brain. And then they were like, what do we now? So anyway, so sometimes I also have that, do we care? A bit like Ben said yesterday, imaging. But it is exciting, at least on some days. Is it important? It is, but it's not necessary. But I think it has helped. I also think that psychology over those last 50 years have become more ripe for it. You have these sort of third wave methods that are kind of suited for the psychedelic model. So I think psychology is more ripe. I think maybe some anti-establishment, anti-authority, anti-big pharma, anti-what your GP is saying is also happening at the same time, which makes this a little bit disruptive mental health model. People are a lot of people are ready for it. So I think all these things together. The flip side of that I see is the hype. The hype that basically drives the microdosing results, as you could see before. That expectancy, that placebo response, that is made bigger and more amazing because of a massive, massive hype, right? And so I think we have all hyped a bit the early part, try to knock down doors and walls in order for this to happen. Now it's actually happening, the ball is rolling. Now I think we need to be a bit more cautious and not keep on hyping, but be realistic. The Compass data, when it came out, landed probably a bit realistically where it might belong in terms of how efficient this model is.
Well, just one thing about the hype is, while it can drive up outcomes for the microdosing study, what I've also observed is for those who don't have the experience they were hoping for, it has devastating consequences. And, especially when working with people who are treatment resistant, they often feel like this is the last hope for them. And if this doesn't work, you just see their devastation afterwards. So I think we also have to be responsible stewards of the medicine. I wanted to make one comment though. You said, does it matter? Does it matter that we know how these work, and do the companies care? I'll say, I care. And I think there is interest in from companies. Yes, but no, we were very interested in that, and I'll tell you why. So, you heard Rick yesterday, and he talked about, we designed our model for maximum therapeutic impact. We didn't care so much about the economics. Well, that's very nice for a nonprofit organization. But most companies working in this space are not nonprofits, and Rick is exceptional in many ways. Most organizations will not have that luxury. And so what you'll see more and more is more efforts to slim down the care model, because the provision of care is one of the most expensive ingredients of this care model. So when you talk about a 6 to 8 hour session, 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 model, I think MAPS also had 12 psychotherapy sessions. That's really expensive. That model of care is very expensive. So when you have the luxury of understanding a bit about why does this work, what ingredients of preparation are most important, that will enable you to have a much more informed approach if you need to say, okay, let's have 1 prep session instead of 3, because we know how to really focus in that session. Or you can think about the role of technology and supplementing some of that work that you would do with the therapist. And at least instead of just guessing, you would have actual data to inform some of those choices. So please keep doing your work, David.
Thank you. I want to bring you back more macro again. A dichotomous approach maybe, but might even be a polychotomous approach to the diagnostic tools again, because I find them to be such leverage of power in this field. And those of us who use the mental health, or used to use, or ex-users of these services are very important to many people, and we put a lot of public money into them, and also private money through insurance companies in other countries. And the discourse lately in Western European countries for a long time have been disease-based, and it was such a fresh breath of fresh air when Sergio mentioned the name of Aaron Antonovsky here yesterday, and salutogenesis, and these guys who swam against the current in the 70s and 80s. So I want to ask you, do you believe when DSM-6 will be developed, or ICD-11 or 12, that the progress, hopeful progress in psychedelics, and will have influence on, because this is such these indicators and the way they are put together. I don't know if you read the work of Skull and Davis and many others, the critical analysis on DSM, and even Alan Francis. Do you think these possible progress in psychedelics, in mental health, could actually have effects on changing our diagnostic tools, which are completely focused on disease, so much that young people that I meet say to me, before telling me their name, I am bipolar, I am ADHD, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. They identify their identity so much now at the disease end spectrum that it's becoming a societal issue. So are we capable of turning that around through, also partially through psychedelic development, to change the way we address the discussion about the DSM and the ICD? Who wants to start?
I can comment really quickly. I mean, I think this change has been ripe even pre the modern psychedelic resurgence. The WHO has defined health as not the present, the absence of disease, but the presence of well-being. So I think there's a push in that direction already, and then the psychedelics themselves, because of the nature of the profound experiences that people have, are very attractive to a lot of people in society that may not have a diagnosis, and you know, on the sort of Gaussian curve of human existence, don't fall a standard deviation away. But I think there's more awareness that there's this spectrum of human experience, and that that there's pressures in that direction. I don't know how quickly it'll go, but.
I think it might take a very long time, but I think that the psychedelics potentially are supporting a bit of a different direction, also potentially for the way we see and label and categorize and diagnose in mental health. I mean, that's, I think, quite far out into the future, but I don't know if people know about the RDoC, the research criteria for a different approach to understand mental health conditions, and also in a way to conduct research. If you have an arbitrary category of a diagnosis, which I guess to some degree the DSM and ICD is, you will have people with depression who only overlaps tiny bit, complete different presentations, but they still fulfill the same criteria. It might be that those criteria are slightly arbitrary. If you do research into those, you will have a vicious circle of being trapped in one way of trying to understand it, and you have to be very rigid when you do a trial. So you have to have one diagnosis, one primary diagnosis at least. That's otherwise it's very difficult to get it approved and so on. And maybe those categories are not completely correct. Maybe we should, and this is where neuroscience might really come to play a role more, is that maybe it's other things. Maybe it's reward deficiency, impulsivity, some of the connectedness, trust, other things, and some of them with a very more clear biological, neurobiological footprint, fingerprint. That might be more correct, and they might sit across the current diseases. It might be that you have ADHD, addiction, PTSD, and you have some similar things that you can also detect through neuroscience in the brain, and that might be what you need to study. That might be what you need to trial and target. And I think the psychedelics, with their broad prediction error model, screwing up, bottom-up thing, which we didn't go into with the Rebus model, but that is very cross-diagnostic. It is tapping into entrapped behaviors and thinking, and that probably is, and it loosens that up and opens for new perspective, induces connection, a sense of connectedness, and all these things. They might be important, and they might open up for cross-diagnostic according to the current categories, and I think that is a healthy development. I think when we are a bit further with all this development, trials will be conducted more real life, where it doesn't really matter whether the primary diagnosis is OCD, PTSD, or depression, anxiety. You collect important data, but you don't have it so categorized, and I think psychedelics in a way will push in that direction, so potentially it could have an impact on the way we actually diagnose.
I think that's a critical point. The power of psychedelics to challenge the DSM, I think, lies very much in the transdiagnostic effects. For example, there was an RDoC trial with ketamine for acute suicidality, and it's a transdiagnostic effect, that it doesn't matter what their diagnosis was, and so that challenges both our diagnostic system, but also our understanding of what is actually going on neurobiologically behind the suicidal ideation.
Because there's a practical reason for this question, and the practical reason is the fact that we are diagnosing more and more, we're treating more and more, and at the other end we are seeing in this country at least 250% increase in disability. So this cannot go on forever like this. This is a paradox that's hard to explain. But bring you back to the task at hand. Just a question. What do governments and those directing health policy need to do in order to escalate or ease the integration of psychedelic into official mental health systems? Who wants to start?
It's too easy of a question. So.
Too easy. Okay.
I think part of the challenge is there's a culture war out there around drugs, and I think that spectrum of drugs and medicines, you know, a lot of people think that there's a real clear line between the two, but if you look at the use of opiates, at least in the US, you know, we have, those are prescribed medicines, but we have an opioid epidemic with many people dying every day. So obviously the distinction is not so clear. So what's unfortunate is, you know, I guess I naively think people should just follow the science, and I think for a large number of people that will convince them. But for others, it's attitudes. And I think Kelsey talked about that a little bit yesterday, that we may underestimate the importance of shifting hearts, so not just minds. And I think part of that can be driven by stories from real people who've gone through these experiences. I think also, I know I have a family friend who their son just came to their parents, or he was living far away, and they realized he's been experiencing, you know, depression, OCD symptoms, and just is in a devastated state. And they were so desperate to help him, and now they're looking at the use of psychedelics. And these are individuals who never would have been open to thinking about the use of psychedelics as a medicine or a medical treatment. And so unfortunately what you see is a lot of people who need to have people who are in their sphere, you know, that it feels personal to them. And then to see somebody, you know, experience a change, have some therapeutic benefit. Unfortunately, that feels really slow, but I know we want change faster, but for a lot of people, they won't change unless they're personally affected. And I think that's a reality. And I think you see some of that, and regulators and people who are working on policy, they're people too, and they have people who are affected by mental health, and I think, you know, for them, they have to have a personal shift. And then you need to see some policy movements. So in the US, you know, we have Oregon, a state that has legalized the use of psilocybin for treating individuals, and then Colorado is another state that just approved the use of psilocybin that will be rolling out in 3 years. Yet we're all a little nervous about how it's going to go because we don't have the regulatory frameworks in place. So psilocybin is not approved yet by the FDA. And so a lot of the infrastructure that needs to be in place to regulate, you know, who are the individuals who are providing the care, what kind of training should they get, what's going to be the oversight. So you have to also think about the pacing of when you enable these treatments to enter into the market. Do you have the infrastructure in place to safeguard people? And so it's a bit of a balancing act of timing all of that correctly. And when you think about changing the hearts and minds, you have to make sure when you start implementing these approaches, or, you know, when Oregon gets started, you got to be careful about if somebody has a bad experience and how that hits the media, you know, relative to those who have a good experience. So it's a pretty complex tapestry of ingredients that need to happen just right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, just really quickly, my practical advice to a healthcare system would be to start with the gateway drug of ketamine, because it's approved, it's legal. We have 20 years of clinical trials. We have national, you know, professional guidelines in a number of different countries, and it allows the healthcare system to become used to the very different paradigm of using a psychoactive medication, you know, rapidly acting psychoactive medication that requires preparation and integration, and so much of the infrastructure that's necessary and sort of the approach is very similar. So that's the low-hanging fruit that is there for you know, ready to be picked.
So basically build the infrastructure, the policy movements, regulations, et cetera, around something that's already legal, waiting for the other things to push through the third, and then add that on. That would be the practical advice to the members of the establishment that some of are here in the room?
Yeah, I think so as well. But I also think that, in a way, a lot of the health system, when it comes to mental health, is trapped in a one-way ticket. That it's very chronic. You end up on prescriptions. You end up in a system because although there's talk about recovery model, the current way that the whole system is set up and the treatments at hand are not really in a way supporting that. It's not that much of a recovery model. And I think new treatments, including particularly this movement with MDMA, ketamine, psychedelics and so on, but also non-invasive brain stimulation. And if you combine those, then I think if people start embracing that and see this is actually going to be a very significant part of the future, then it's going to be something else. It's going to be interventional, clinics for interventional psychiatry. That's a very different, that will have to change the system. They have to change the way we think about treatment in mental health, and therefore also how the system should work. You need clinics for interventional psychiatry, not just psychedelics, non-invasive brain stimulation. We are going to test that in our lab. Also others are going to do it. We have now non-invasive deep brain stimulation where you can actually target specific regions. You have the non-specific psychedelic effect on the brain. Then you have more specific targeted, both superficial with TMS in the cortex that already exists. If you combine that, then you have interventional psychiatry. And I think that's the future, and that will change the pathway. People are not in a dead end going in to be blunted by a forever prescription in mental health, but they're coming in. The psychology suddenly comes with more evidence because it's part of this model. So psychology will play a more lifted up, acknowledged role in it, and that will change the system.
But from a system perspective, we need to shift also with the mental health community services, and maybe to focus our intention when it comes to the third tier, the hospital services, the most expensive services, that kind of to do the architect around them based on a different vision of community mental health service, move more of the services out to the community through these different tools and aspects, because this is also a shift that is happening. People are staying much shorter in the hospital. Of course, that's the most expensive part of the treatment. It's very expensive to be one person for 24 hours in the hospital. It's also allocation of money, etc., so this could be also helpful for that. I'm just wondering, we have 8 minutes left, if we should also open up for some question, if that's possible. I think it's also very important. There's already a hand over here, so let's use the last 8 minutes to direct questions to you guys. Microphones, they're coming.
While they're getting the mics, I'll just say I would highly recommend just a real-world pilot. You know, if the country is not ready to legalize and implement across the entire healthcare system, think about what the measures of success are from a variety of stakeholders and pilot it, you know. And I
but
mean,
in our view, there was not, for my issue on legalization or decriminalization, just because
just get going, get some momentum.
It'll push through in the end, and we could prepare and use ketamine at this, while we're waiting. Yeah, sure. And then the gentleman over there.
Thank you all for your participation today.
Please introduce yourselves.
Oh, my name's Casey. I'm from the United States, and so I was wondering if those of you who have experience with the U.S. healthcare system, if you could comment a little bit about health insurance coverage of these, how that might play out, because obviously now, even with more conventional health, mental health treatment options, that's kind of rare to have health insurance coverage of those types of things. So I'm interested to kind of get your insights on how that might play out in the U.S.
Thank you. Let's take 3. Let's take another one right away, and then Ben.
Who's got a microphone here?
No. Let's take this one and this, and then let's take 4 questions all in a row.
Okay, U.S. Well, I have to remember. Should we answer it now, or we
wait?
wait?
Wait. Next question. Yeah, he's over there.
Okay.
This.
Thank you. My name is Svavar. I would like to ask a question. So we're seeing how these profound experiences are having a profound effect on people. And psychiatry is looking very much at like the data around that. But is psychiatry taking note of these experiences and how they are driving the change and finding, like, looking into the nature of these experiences and trying to figure out maybe other ways of bringing them about than through psychedelics necessarily? Thank you.
Thank you. And here, and then Ben.
Good morning. My name is Einar. Thank you very much for a great conference and extremely interesting lectures. I have a question to Dr. Erritzoe regarding microdosing. I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah.
So the results you were presenting from your study, you talked about issues such as depression and mindfulness, etc. I was wondering if you had done, or if you're aware of any studies that have been done on basically on cognitive functionality. Say, look at quote-unquote healthy individuals and look into the effect that microdosing has on in say problem-solving scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben, last one.
Thank you. I'm Ben Sessa, Head of Psychedelic Medicine at Awakn Life Sciences. You've talked about how psychedelics and psychedelic research are pulling down the pillars of psychiatry in terms of categorical diagnoses and challenging DSM ICD, which is great. What about the concept of real-world data trials pulling down the pillars of the RCTs and the way we do research? Because I think psychedelics might be playing a part in that as well. So I'd like your opinion on that.
Thank you. We'll start with Casey. Who wants to answer, Casey?
Yes. So in the U.S., a lot of people receive their mental health care through private insurance or employer-based insurance. But there's a limitation of resources, and so a lot of people pay out of pocket. So with this new paradigm of care, what I think a lot of people are expecting is for the preparation and integration sessions, you can use standard billing codes for psychotherapy. But for the administration session, that's unique. We don't have anything like that in the mental health field and from a billing perspective in the US. So there will need to be work done to create new billing codes for that and figure out how do you value that. And there's differences with MDMA and psilocybin, for instance, about how active the therapist is. In psilocybin, the therapist is instructed to only respond if the participant really needs some support, whereas MDMA, it's much more active and interactive. But there needs to be new billing codes. Payers are interested, but again, they're usually slow to adopt expensive treatments. And so a lot of eyes are going to be on the manufacturers and their work, and also the real world evidence they collect to show the value. So a lot of times they'll look at generics, existing treatments. So if you have SSRIs, which are much cheaper and generic, and get equivalent effects, then I would not anticipate that they're going to be willing to pay. So you need to show some sort of superiority in some way, whether it's durability or whatnot. It's one of the reasons why Compass went after TRD, treatment-resistant depression. There's no standard of care for treatment-resistant depression. The treatments that people get for TRD are very costly. So it's rather strategic. I didn't make that choice, even though I was there, but I think it was a good one.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to number 3 for you, David, the microdosing, because we have so little time left.
Yeah, so basically, with placebo, the data is not very supportive at all, also in our trial with cognitive tasking beyond placebo. So that's the short answer, that's not convincing either with microdosing. But the other question about the psychedelic experience, I think that's such a different, complete novel concept for people outside of this space who are not now used to it or have early knowledge about it. So it will take a while for people to actually get to terms with that. That's in a way also driving both pharma and some academic groups, regulators from thinking, what about non-psychedelic psychedelics that are having some of the same pharmacology but without having the experience? It will be really interesting to follow. A lot of us who are doing the work and talking to the patients, collecting qualitative data, narratives from the experiences and what that means for people and their therapeutic effects, it's a bit difficult to imagine that it will be as powerful as the ones that induce a proper psychedelic experience. It's very difficult to say that it's causal. So I think it's a great thing that the COMPASS data that I showed, that is actually not published yet, shows that emotional breakthrough in the experience is actually a predictor of the outcome. It doesn't mean that it's causal. It's an association. If you really wanted to make it causal, you would kind of need to, one example, sedate people, put them on an anesthesia and give them a psychedelic and see whether it works, right? Because otherwise you'll find correlations. You won't necessarily find the cause, which is tricky. It's a cool study to do, complicated because of the interaction between, I don't know, propofol and psychedelics. And we have a full protocol ready, but I don't know if we'll ever get it approved. And also it might be difficult to interpret. But so we also, in our lab and also others, doing microphenomenology, testing what happens from minute to minute to minute in a DMT experience, correlated that to what happens in the brain. We are very interested in all that, and other groups are as well. But people who are not used to this, it's a bit of a mouthful that, oh, you have this massive, weird, altered state of consciousness experience as part of the treatment model. But, you know, it's coming. That's also why it shouldn't happen too fast. It will take a while for people to get on board with that, I think.
Thank you, David. We live in a three-dimensional world, and we have a fourth dimension that's called time, and now it's running out, and it's almost gone. But we have a massive question here from Ben, who wants to take on if the real world, the data is pulling down regarding the diagnostic systems and that macro question that he posed. David, Lowan?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Also because you're both awakened. So yeah. So we to your colleague. So yeah. No, I'm not super expert in all these fancy trial designs for real world data. So I'm getting my head around it as well. But I fully agree that that's totally meaningful to try to step away from rigid, weird, arbitrary, randomized trials as the only thing. I think massive scale real world data, also with new statistical methods, fancy ways of understanding that data can yield incredibly important data as well, for sure. I agree.
I feel we have a component here for another lecture from, because I feel that you have the answer to that question yourself, as so often is. But we've ran out of time, so we cannot address that any further. I would like to thank you very much for your participation in the panel, and thank you for the audience and for the question. We maybe should have taken longer time for that because they're fruitful. Thank you very much. And